Good afternoon. I'm Charles Shapiro, the president of the World Affairs Council. Today's program is with former Chief of Protocol Capricia Marshall, author of Protocol, The Power of Diplomacy and How to Make It Work for You. This program is brought to you by the members of the World Affairs Council. I want to welcome Clyde Tuggle, who's a board member and who introduced us to Ambassador Marshall when we last had her on here. And I'm going to say it was in September, but I might be wrong. And Robert Abernathy from our board. Also want to welcome Nico Weinberg, who's the Chief of Protocol of the state of Georgia, and Vanessa Ibarra, who's the Director of the City of Atlanta Office of International Affairs, and a whole bunch of people from her team who are on. Thank you so much for joining us today. Capricia Marshall serves as Ambassador of Residence at the Atlantic Council. She's president of Global Engagement Strategies, which advises clients on issues relating to the nexus of business and cultural diplomacy. From 2009 to 2013, she was Chief of Protocol of the United States, where she oversaw, I have to tell you, this is really impressive, 6 state and official visits, countless working visits of foreign leaders, 6 summits, and the protocol arrangements for the president and secretaries of state to travel to 42 countries. A native of Cleveland, Ambassador Marshall is a graduate of Purdue University, studied for a year at La Universidad Complutense in Madrid, and got her law degree from Chase Western Reserve University Law School. Ambassador Marshall, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you.
It is such a pleasure to be back with you, Ambassador. Thank you for having me.
Let me just start off with a little reminder. Can you remind us of the difference between diplomacy, protocol, and etiquette? Everybody tends to conflate them.
Well, yes, they do. And well, first, I'd like to say, again, thank you very much for having me back. And what a pleasure it is to be speaking to your audience. So very grateful to my dear friend, Clyde Tuggle, who introduced us, as you pointed out. I'm quite pleased to have the Chief of Protocol for the state of Georgia on as well, so I'll be extra careful about all of my P's and Q's. People actually do conflate this quite a bit. There is a dramatic difference, but they're also, when they're so effective when they are interwoven and used to advance your diplomatic engagements, your personal networks, whatever your goal, whatever you're trying to achieve. In diplomacy, you are engaging with other countries in order to achieve a certain policy objective. Whether it is strengthening an alliance or addressing a grievance. Secretary Clinton, I stated in my book, defines diplomacy as the process by which you try to reach out to others in pursuit of an increased understanding and try to resolve matters between you and and other countries. And she points out, as Winston Churchill says, it's better than war. Protocol, well, it sets the stage for diplomacy to take place so that you have the opportunity for this elegant diplomatic dance between 2 leaders. Protocol sets the foundation, all of the elements that go into the exchange, the diplomatic exchange, are provided by protocol, from where they're going to meet, how they're going to meet, what's the mindset while they're meeting. All of these tools of protocol are incredibly powerful for all of our foreign policy objectives. I mean, you stated, Ambassador, that many people think, oh, pish posh, who needs this? It's, these details. Do they really matter? Do they really make a difference? Well, they do. They make a critical difference, because it's those nuances, those micro details that in protocol we provided to our diplomats. And in my instance, the highest diplomat in our country and perhaps the world, the President of the United States, while he, at the time, President Obama, was trying to engage with his counterparts. What I wanted to give him, and what protocol allowed me to give him, is that pivotal edge, that extra oomph. I wanted to turn the tables, if you will, and create a power pivot for him. Etiquette are those agreed upon social codes of conduct that you have. And they differ from culture to culture, and you have to be aware of those differences. When you learn etiquette and all of these defined rules, you really are creating an opening for a collaborative spirit. When you behave in a certain way, when you acknowledge the social codes of conduct, and particularly when you're traveling abroad, the differences, whether from the United States, when you're in a foreign country, you are showing respect. And when you show that respect, and again, oftentimes so minimized in its importance that you don't realize that the effect it really can have in opening doors. And what you're also doing is exhibiting fairness, and you're demonstrating a trust to that individual. So all of these tools of protocol and social codes of conduct, when they are used well, and they are soft power tools. We talked about that, I think, a bit in our last discussion, the importance of soft power tools, and we can get to that, but they are incredibly effective for your government engagements, your business negotiations, and certainly for your personal interactions.
Let me ask you, because I was talking about this with Laura downstairs earlier. Particularly protocol and etiquette, do they help women in business? Do they help people when they're in unfamiliar circumstances?
Well, as you know, Ambassador, because I know that you read my book, I wrote a whole chapter on this, and because the book is actually it's of course to address both men, well, all genders. And it's not specific, but I specifically in the last chapter wanted to address the issues that women face in the chapter titled "Negotiating While Female," because women are in a constant state of negotiation in everything that we do. These same soft power resources that I was just talking about, that leaders use to, leverage in a debate on a arms treaty. What we need to do is to assist us in creating a gender neutral playing field. And what we're attempting to do also, or I guess move away from, are any conscious or unconscious biases. And there are a variety of ways that I talk about very quickly, and I just would love to address this for your audience in how women can do that. First and foremost, you have to adopt an equalizing mindset. That is really important. Oftentimes, I talk a little bit about, empathy and humility and how important those characteristics are in diplomacy and for your engagements when you're trying to bridge and influence. But for women, we kind of come to the table with that in a fullness. And so what we really need to do is develop I'm not going to back down confidence while we're there. And we can do that also in supporting that attitude by building a really solid network, individuals who believe in us and promote us, and knowing our worth. Before you go to that negotiating table, know exactly how much you should be asking for, what do other people make in those positions. Mika Brzezinski has a fantastic program out. She's now paired, I think, with Fortune 500, Fortune on 50 women over 50 and promoting them about how they knew their worth and why that was important to them. It's empowering to know your worth. And so I strongly suggest that. I suggest to women to raise their own gender equity index, know before you go into a particular country or new culture about a sensitivity to physical contact. Is there a difference in language and addressing men and women? Dress, how you should dress, cultural codes when it comes to business interactions. All of this is very important, but what is really important is not to delegate away your own authority. That you can adhere to a social code of conduct, but that does not mean that I am lessening my position within my delegation, my business delegation, my personal, my government, that if I am the vice president who has been sent there, I'm going to sit in that center seat just like a man would. I am going to make the keynote remarks as well. So you have to manage that really, really well. And lastly, I really want to push, you have to avoid, there's a yoga to tokenism. We all understand what tokenism is. We don't want to be that face that is drawn out and put forth just because we happen to be a woman or a person of color. But we should fight those mantles, fight them, make sure that there is representation, because there are incredibly qualified women everywhere in every walk of life. I'm always surprised when folks say, well, I just couldn't find a qualified woman, and my jaw drops. But I also look to the example that Christine Lagarde gave me. She said, listen, she goes, I knew oftentimes when I was being dragged out onto stage because I was a woman, but I used that opportunity. I showed them that I did my homework, that I worked really hard, and that I belonged there. And then they started to invite me back again and again and again. And I brought more qualified women into that room and more qualified women into that room, opening the door for so many more women in those corridors of power, in particularly, as we know, hers are in the economic realm. And so that was really important.
That's terrific. That's really useful. What I should have said at the beginning is, of course, International Women's Day is next week. That's right. And we're using this month, we're having programs with women all month long, not just to talk about women's issues, but to talk about including women's issues. And so that's a great answer. I love that. Can we talk about entry strategy for a minute? We've got a new president of the United States, but entry strategy applies to whether university presidents, governors, CEO of a company, leaders of an organization. Obviously, a new leader wants to maximize the impact of their first few months in office. How does what you've done help arrange that and maximize the impact of a new leader, whether it's a president or a CEO?
Well, that's a great question, and particularly at this time when we have a president that is, I think, in office for still less than 50 days. He was given, President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, our first woman of color. It's just, makes me so proud to be an American, that she is the first in that position, incredibly well qualified. But they had this transition period that before entering office that would help to set them up into the office. Regrettably, their transition period was cut short because, there were just lots of complications with post issues after the election. The GSA didn't hand them the reins as normally occurs right after the election. So they had to wait a bit of time and go through a scramble. What they decided to do when they had that time period, and what's incredibly important, whether it's in government or in business, is to set up your team quickly. What are my systems? Who are the people that are going to be working with me on those systems? And that's where protocol really helps, because we already have the foundations, expectations. That's what you want to make sure, is that expectations are set from previous administrations, how things worked really well, how things didn't work very well, and we're able to plug and play those immediately. January 20th in our country is incredibly important. It is Inauguration Day. And a very important day. And so the new administration begins literally at 12:01. After that oath of office is taken, members of the administration are granted entry, the new administration, into the White House, and they get to work. I know friends who were setting out and going right to their desk, right to their jobs to get settled. And so onboarding those individuals is really key, and protocol was really important in helping to do that. There's also one element that I think is for no matter who you are and what position you're taking on, that can assist you in moving into this position and also setting the tone, structure for your office, your operation. And that I refer to as a beginner's mindset. Um, it's incredibly important to walk in that asking those questions. You know, what happened before me? What worked before me? What can I change? How can I make this operation better? Without, oftentimes people take on a position and they want to show I'm the expert. I know how to do this. Don't you worry, I can do it. And I'm going to make a lot of changes across the board. That is unsettling first for the team members that are there for you. And in government, political appointees enter, and there are already lots of foreign service officers, career officers, many who have been in those positions for 20, 30, 40 years. And so you want to first understand what the position is about, what's expected, but you also want to learn from them. And by being open with a beginner's mind, you are conveying that there's more possibilities. When you come in with an expert's mind, you are closing off those possibilities. So it's really important to not try to step into that position and label and stereotype and format things into a solid pattern. Asking those questions, being curious, and being open to new methodologies and learning these new perspectives is really, really important.
When we have a new president or any leader of an organization, everybody wants to meet with them at once, wants to be the first. How do you sort that out? I mean, you've got, and obviously with international relations, you've got, sort of the protocol rules that would stipulate, the president always, the first visit is always to Canada, right? But then you've also got the sort of the policy people say, I've got a crisis, you don't have, this is more important than accepting the phone call from the prime minister of country X. Mm-hmm. How do you sort all those out?
Well, again, thank goodness for presidents in particularly, there are certain protocols. There is a structure to this. And we have seen that when you don't follow the roadmap, the path that has been set for you, and knowing that you have to be flexible within that roadmap, because as you point out, Ambassador, there will be issues that arise. That was one of the joys for me of working in my government positions. History is happening at that moment.
Right.
And so I never knew what was coming down the pike, and you just have to be prepared for it. Well, certainly that presidents most certainly have to be prepared for those flexible moments, for those off-ramp moments. But you can always go back to that structure, that roadmap, that well-defined roadmap. And when you follow along with that, again, you're meeting certain expectations, whether it's from your neighbors in the hemisphere, it's Canada and Mexico, addressing them, calling them first. When you don't, it's unsettling and questions arise. And sometimes a certain mistrust can even evolve from that. So by sticking to that structure, by sticking to that roadmap, you are meeting those expectations and certainly trying to achieve, I think, in a better way, your goals. What the presidents are given a what do they call it? A honeymoon period of 100 days. And you have to move at rapid pace. And we also know that in the United States, the next election has already started several months ago. And so people would like to change, people in Congress and this, in the House and the Senate. And so you have a limited time in which to enact. So you have to be organized. You have to use that structure, use that 100 days effectively to put forth what will really matter in your administration.
I neglected to say at the beginning, everybody should please send me your questions. And to do so, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there's something that says more. And if you click on more, there's something that says Q&A. And I want you to click on Q&A, send me your questions so that I can ask your questions. Okay, so now let's go back for a little bit. How is President Biden doing in his first 6 weeks from a protocol perspective, not from a political perspective, although clearly the two are related?
Right. Well, I think that he's doing great. I really do. I am really impressed with the fact that, he has figured out what those priorities are. He set those priorities out immediately, day one, both his domestic agenda and his foreign policy agenda. And he's driving it. Of course, the greatest concern is the pandemic crisis.
Right.
And he made that known throughout his campaign. So there's that. He has the campaign promises that he committed to, and how then he was going to achieve them once in office. He is clearly addressing all of those campaign objectives and starting off systematically in moving through. It was, as I said, the pandemic was the most urgent of issues that he needed to address. But within the pandemic, he is also addressing the economy. And then within that, he's also working on those issues that we saw last summer. I mean, and continue throughout, racial inequality, and how do we assist that? And how do we help those who the system unfairly treats when we are talking about the pandemic, when we are talking about the economy? I think he's doing a brilliant job at interweaving all of these top concerns with one another, so that we can move at a fast pace at trying to find solutions and moving towards the betterment of people's lives, because that's what a president is supposed to do. They're supposed to change our lives for the better, and that is what he is trying to achieve. On the foreign policy front, he has been working really hard. Two big relationships, China and Russia. One, he is sort of the relationship, I think he believes that he can address with immediate action. That's the relationship with Russia, where we have, our issues of hacking and interference and constant involvement in, our democracy. Whereas with China, this is a long-term issue, I don't want to call it a problem, but it's more of an entanglement that he has to figure out how he walks through that diplomatic dance that I was talking about earlier. The economic issues, and certainly human rights. And there's a lot of those, the finer details of diplomacy that he's going to have to attend to here with that relationship. And then, of course, we have the Middle East, and continuing on some of the very good problems that or good solutions rather, that President Trump had set forth, like the Abraham Accords, but then also working with the Saudis on Yemen and the Saudis themselves. So there's lots that is going on. Again, I think he and his team are doing a phenomenal job at interweaving these, knowing what their goals are, and systematically working through them.
How has Zoom changed diplomacy? I mean, we had the first visit to Canada was a virtual visit. I mean, obviously that means you missed lots of things, the dinners, the pageantry. How has that changed?
Well, it quite interesting. I mean, when I saw the photos that were presented, particularly at the press conference of, President Biden at one podium, and then Prime Minister Trudeau at the other, in this just sort of big screen that was vertical of him standing there. It just seemed odd to me, clearly, but we are looking at those elements of the engagement that are important and how can we replicate them in this virtual space. It was a bit of flattery to me that the old team called and said, hey, you know, we're trying to do this, this, and this. What do you think? And just helping them to try to work through how do we achieve those same objectives in this new environment? And what is sorely missing, of course, is that interpersonal exchange, the screen. I mean, I wish I was sitting right next to you, Ambassador, as opposed to transmitting through the virtual Zoom. But so you can't, and you can't attempt to try to do that. But what you have to still look at are issues like reciprocity and parity. Do they look as though they are standing on an even playing field? Because the way that we treat them when we invite them into the White House will be the way that they will treat us when they invite us for a Zoom bilateral in their space. We have to make sure that we're still attending to flags, we're still attending to introductions. And those elements actually gain more importance because you want to make sure that everyone in the room is familiar with who everybody else is. You set out those at the get-go. This is my Secretary of State. This is my Assistant of European Affairs. Whomever those people are, you want to make sure that your counterpart actually sees them and notes who they are. Because when you're seated at the bilateral table, you have time to look at nameplates. There's a formal introduction. People are shaking hands. You're making that physical connection with someone, you're looking someone in the eye. You don't have the ability to do that on the virtual. So those introductions are super important. And then being clear on agenda in advance, making sure that they have received your agenda. These are the points that we want to get through. What are the points that you want to get through? Because you don't want an interaction to sort of start to ramble and become undone. You won't get anywhere within that time frame, and it will be, frankly, wasted between the wasted time of two incredibly busy people and all the others who are seated at the table, and not achieving the goal of the exchange.
When it's a virtual meeting, did President Biden virtually go to Ottawa, or did Prime Minister Trudeau? I mean, who's the host of the meeting?
It's actually quite interesting that you asked that question because, it does matter who is hosting whom.
And which flag is on which side. I mean, depending on who the host is.
It does. And so I saw that for our president, we had the Canadian flag over his shoulder and to the right of, which means that's the position of honor, which means they are the guest to us. So it is interesting because then it goes down. Who then hosts next? How does that happen? And I was most interested in their backgrounds and where they were seated. Is President Biden going to be in his personal office, whereas the prime minister was in some elegant room? Again, you want to look at those issues of parity, making sure that it's clear in advance and that staff has spoken to one another. The protocol officers have spoken to one another well in advance. This is the type of setting that we're looking at. One is not at Camp David and the other one is in the Grand Palais. Right. It has to be equal.
Okay, we've got a bunch of questions from the audience. So
wonderful.
Ask them. Susan Hitchcock, who is one of my favorite people and is a loyal audience member, asks, as the first female VP and woman of color, how much more scrutiny will Vice President Harris be subjected to regarding protocol and other matters of leadership?
That is an excellent, excellent question. When the vice president was elected, immediately upon their election, I called a dear friend of mine who I knew was advising Vice President Harris. and offered my services to her and impressed upon them that they needed to not only learn about protocol and international engagements, but they had to almost perfect it, because there will be extra scrutiny. There will be a she can't quite do this, can she attitude. And we have to prove them wrong, because of course she can. But you have to do it flawlessly. It's like what Ginger Rogers said, not only do I do what Fred Astaire does, but I do it backwards and in heels. We have to make sure that she is completely overly prepared for these engagements, that she knows well in advance all of the expectations, and she's incredibly well researched and briefed. I've been sort of pushing that theme, making sure, and offering, of course, my assistance at every turn. I sent her my book so that she could read up on it.
I'm sure it's highlighted now. That's great. Robert Abernathy asks, is there, and I think I know the answer, is there established protocol for dealing with the press and the media? I mean, it's one thing when you're dealing with a foreign country. It's another thing when you're dealing with a gaggle of reporters shouting questions.
Well, it is interesting that you point out with a foreign leader, because foreign press is also a very different system and protocol.
Right.
The U.S. press is its own entity. What do they call it? The third, or the fourth?
The fourth estate.
Thank you. My goodness, the word is slipping my mind here. But it is, very, very important, clearly, within a democracy, because we should commit to transparency of operation and of service. And so we should have that oversight and involvement of the media. How that comes about from administration to administration is interesting to see, the relationship that the leadership and the administration has with the media. What type of access will they be given? Who will be that spokesperson? All of that is tone setting from the beginning. There is an expectation that they will be given access to the White House grounds. So there are certain protocols that are in place. There is a room, the press room at the White House that they stay in. I understand now, due to COVID, they can't have their singular desks anymore, because networks were given certain desks, and then other cable news networks were given their space as well. That's no longer the case. They can come in and out, but they can't stay there 24/7. I understand that some people actually used to sleep under their desks, and then there's a certain protocol now during COVID of where they sit. But there is that seating arrangement. During my time at the White House and the Clintons, Helen Thomas, I don't know if you remember her, Ambassador.
Always got the first question.
Always got the first question, always got the first seat. And I thought that was wonderful for a female reporter. So yes, there are those certain protocols that are in place, but then the administration itself will set the tone of how they're going to operate with the media. And I couldn't have been more excited when they chose Jen Psaki to stand behind the podium, an incredibly experienced individual. She gained her chops at the State Department and certainly on the campaign trail. She's already been very, very effective. She understands the issues, and she knows the importance of conveying the information the right way for the Americans, for the press to be informed, but also balancing that with the information, with her service to the president as well. There's a little bit of a delicate balance there.
Kelly Sebastiani asks, are there situations where diplomacy fails? How do you handle that? How do you purposely send a message to another country that things aren't working, that you're unhappy with them, that you're offended, or all that whole range of negative views that sometimes you want to communicate?
Well, it's happening right now today. We just learned this morning when we woke up that President Biden is planning on putting forth sanctions against Russia. And so, yes, that is the prerogative of a country, of leadership, when they believe that their global partners are not acting in a way that comports the protocols of our global engagements, how we should be interacting with one another, how we should be behaving, if you will, even like in the context, if I'm sort of diminishing it a bit, but I don't mean to, but to compare it to the earlier part of the conversation that we had, there are certain social codes of conduct that as a leader in the world that you should adhere to. And when they don't, I mean, imprisoning, someone, poisoning an individual of your country, there is attention that needs to be given to that. And certainly there were other infractions that President Biden was looking at. I mean, the hacking that occurred with SolarWinds, we're learning even beyond that through Amazon Web Services. They infiltrated, and this was at the highest levels of the Russian government. They infiltrated not only huge sectors, agencies in our U.S. government, but as well big U.S. companies, and caused a lot of problems. And I think we have yet to even learn the damage that had been done. So President Biden is making a big stamp there with setting forth sanctions against Russia.
So how does protocol, which focuses on getting along, what is the role of the chief of protocol? What is the role of protocol when you're sanctioning a country, when you're telling them, not only are we unhappy with you, we are so unhappy that, we're going to prohibit this, that, and the other thing from happening. What's your role in that? I mean, well, you see these movies where they slap the guy in the face with the glove, that's what's the modern day equivalent of that?
That was great. That was great. It is there. We are grateful that there are protocols that are in place, and that there's an entity that is in place that will continue to pursue the furtherance of the relationship between the two governments. So during this time, just to sort of outline it for you, there will be prohibitions set forth by the U.S. government of how we can engage. Can our diplomats speak to one another? Will the U.S. ambassador that is posted in Russia have meetings with government employees in the Russian government or not? Will they be prohibited? So there'll be a very specific outline of what can and cannot be done in our engagements now with a country that we are displeased with, that we have now acted upon. And you
would we tell them that in advance?
Oh yes, that is well outlined. Absolutely. Absolutely. And then you may see it will start to advance. You may see then that an ambassador may be then requested to leave the country. Mm-hmm. And that's a big step. Or ambassadors will get recalled. That's another big step. So it's either a U.S. action or it would be on the government of Russia to determine, we no longer recognize your highest representative in our country, and we are sending them back, or we're asking you to take them back.
Would somebody from the White House or State Department have spoken to the Russian ambassador before we announced these?
They should have done the courtesy. Yes, there are those protocols. Those are those courtesies that are in place, and they're diplomatic courtesies, but it's also an expected conversation. There may have been a discussion also from, and I'm assuming it probably happened at a higher level, with Secretary Blinken and his counterpart, the foreign minister, Minister Lavrov, in informing him that these were coming and this is what we're going to be doing. Minister Lavrov is a very experienced diplomat. And so I'm sure that was a very interesting discussion.
Oh, I bet. Lavrov has been foreign minister for, seems like decades.
Yeah. Yeah. Presidents and prime ministers come and go, but Lavrov stays.
Yeah, absolutely. Chantal Sullivan asked a question that when the president is having a meeting with somebody and they're sitting side by side, who sits on the right, who sits on the left, what's the origin of all that?
Oh, yes. So you're speaking of, so at the bilateral table, usually they're across from one another, right? With their delegation members. So the highest ranking person in their delegation, usually the Secretary of State, unless we're in country, and then that would be the ambassador of that country, would be to the president's right. And on the left would be the next highest, and so on and so forth, all the way down the line. The opposite to as well reflected with your with the visiting delegation. When you have a seated or standing next to one another, the position of honor is to the right of the host. So if President Biden is hosting, there is a position of honor to his right, and there would be the president or prime minister of a country. And it was interesting that you ask who sets forth those rules. Well, in 2011, I had a global chiefs of protocol conference and invited all of my counterparts from all over the world to the US, to the State Department. And we made a determination, and there were over 100 chiefs of protocol in attendance. And we made a determination that the position of honor will always be to the right, because there were a couple of countries that would say, oh, you're standing on the left, or they just didn't tell their leader. They were afraid. You have to, I mean, in my job, I knew I had to step forward. It's very hard to tell the president of the United States, sir, you're doing that wrong. But you have to step in. Or, sir, you got a little dandruff on your shoulder and you got to step in before they go out and address the world stage. Or you're chewing gum, sir. I need to have your gum, sir. All of those things are very, very important. But there has to be that person who is willing to step forth and correct it all and make sure that things are being presented in the appropriate fashion.
I got to tell you, when I was an ambassador at Post, I loved it when somebody would come and do that and tell me to brush my shoulder, make me spit out the gum, whatever. The worst thing is for them to, you go to visit somebody and they go, oh, right this way. And they want you to lead. You've never been in the building before. I mean, like, what? This is insane. This is insane. We've got loads of questions about the culture protocol. But it pretty much, it stays the same. That doesn't change from country to country, or does it? Does it change generation from generation? I mean, I'm
sorry, I'm missing. What do you mean? What do you mean, Ambassador?
Have the rules of protocol evolved over time?
Oh, tweaks. No, they pretty much stay very formatted. Precedence order, incredibly important. I talk about in my book the story of the chasing of the carriages. There was the credentialing of an ambassador, very important moment for them. And so who was supposed to follow, which carriage, which country was supposed to follow behind the ambassador that was about to be credentialed? Well, Spain and France were fighting. I should be the one I'm most powerful. No, I should be the one I'm most powerful. And it was the two ambassadors fighting. And literally they went at one another with guns and knives, and there was bloodshed. It was horrible. So the development of precedence order, really, really important. People have an expectation. Who should be first? Who should be second? And what is that based upon? So that the hard work of diplomacy, what we're doing in protocol is setting these standards and expectations so that the hard work of diplomacy can take place. As you point out, there's going to be quite a few difficult conversations that our leaders will engage in. You want that to happen seamlessly and for them to feel comfortable in that setting and know I'm seated to the right, they're seated to the left, and there's no confusion about that.
That's been terrific. This has been great. I've got a bunch of questions. I'm going to send them to you that we've not been able to get to. Some of them are about policy towards specific countries, or those sorts of things, which you may or may not have views on. I suspect you do. But Ambassador Capricia Marshall, thank you so much. This has just been a great 45 minutes. As always, I've learned so much from you. And to the people in our audience, Capricia Marshall is the author of Protocol, The Power of Diplomacy and How to Make It Work for You, which can be purchased at fine bookstores everywhere. We've got upcoming programs this Thursday, Tea in the Garden with me. It's a virtual tea in a virtual garden. It's for our young leaders only. Please sign up for that. Next week on International Women's Day, March 8th, we have invited, and we are hopeful that we will have Princess Rima, the ambassador of Saudi Arabia to the United States, March. She did a program with us in December, and she was terrific. She was great. We've got on March 9th, this is going to be terrific. We've got Katie Kirkpatrick, who's the CEO of the Metropolitan Atlanta Chamber of Commerce, in conversation with Naima Judge from the Bank of America. The Metro Chamber has just announced a racial equity action plan for Atlanta businesses to address racial equity, diversity, and inclusion as they do business. And so we're going to talk about that. That is going to be great. If you like today's program, if you didn't like today's program, now's the time to join the World Affairs Council, either as an individual member or corporate member. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're going to post this program on our YouTube channel. Usually takes a few minutes afterwards, but we're going to do that and hope that you will watch this and our other programs. And I particularly want to thank Fernanda Lucchini Shihada, our executive director, Valerie Lopez DeFrank, our producer, and Laura Brower, our assistant producer. And thank you again, Ambassador Capricia Marshall. This has just been great, and I hope you will agree to come back.
Oh, always. Always. Love Atlanta.
Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Bye-bye.